A year and a half into his presidency, a miracle happened. Vladimir watched Gail on September 11th, 2001 through the bugs in her room. She was living with her mother and disappointed that Brent had not married her yet. In outrage, she raised her fists into the air. Vladimir knew the Jesuits launched 9/11, 2001, against her because her celebrity lover dared to schedule a flight that day to fly to Gail and claim her as his wife. Though she knew the Jesuits launched 9/11, 2001 to crush her. Rather than crush her, she raised her fists in triumph. I declare war on the Jesuit order. Brent, I need to talk to all the world leaders. Tell President Bush that we need to make alliances with Russia and China and work together to defeat the Jesuits. We will declare war on the Jesuit scumbag terrorists. We will not be intimidated. Warn the Russian and Chinese leaders to be extra careful for their life, because I know the Jesuits will try to kill one of them and frame the murder on the Americans, claiming some crazy Americans shot the Russian or Chinese leader, believing them to be behind 9/11. This is a deflection tactic, and we won't fall for it. Gail was talking about him, trying to spare his life. Suddenly, this woman, who before seemed like a fantasy, heroic damsel in distress, became real and reached down to the recesses of his soul and inspired him to heroics. He arranged for her local paper to flash a daring and heroic photo of him. With some hope for his broken heart, still reeling over his wife's death, he chose a photo of himself where he looked especially handsome and manly. Knowing from Gail's rants about Franco Nero's manliness, she was attracted to heroics and manliness. In this photo, a scarf whirled round his neck, giving him the appearance of a dashing and handsome war hero, like a Russian Lancelot from Camelot. Gail's dashing and handsome? Gail's not a politician in heart. She's a true leader who inspires those who follow her to heroics. I want to show her how she inspires me. He worried that her perceptions of him may be colored by American brainwashing against the Soviet Union. He knew from the bugs in her room she read the paper every day. There was a new president in America who seemed to have more honor than Clinton. His hopes for his heart soared. To his amazement, when she read the paper and saw his photo, she brought the paper to her room, plopped on her bed, and lay on her back observing the photo. A strange look came on her face. She just stared and stared at his photo. I never knew the Russian president was so handsome. How heroic he looks, just like my Brent, but with more heroics and valor. I don't think the Jesuits will ever let me marry Brent, but now I think I'm in love with a president. With a president in my life, we can defeat the Jesuits. Oh, how heroic and handsome he looks. She smiled. He's flirting with me in this photo. She went to bed that night and dreamed about him in the bed with her. Now she was helping him heal from Larissa's death, and made it so that it was like his Larissa never died, and he helped her heal over 9/11, so that the Jesuit plot to ravish her heart over Brent boomeranged. He recalled how her heart, ravished for a day over September 11, 2001, rose up in triumph with world leaders the world over to declare war on the Jesuit order. It amazed him the respect all world leaders had for her courage. The entire earth seemed to rally behind her as she defied the Jesuits to keep her down. Now, 15 days after September 11, 2001, this woman from the United States made a statement from her bedroom that he heard through the bugs in her room. I'm going to marry the Russian president. He couldn't believe it. The woman seemed to be Larissa resurrected from the dead. Except this woman had traits that would make her a great wife for a president. She had heroism and valor, a perfect match for him. With a woman like this in his life, if another Kursk disaster happened, he knew he would be a better man next time. He'd have more steel, because this woman had the steel to reinforce him. His heart soared. She was the perfect president's wife. Before her, he hated the job and almost resented his dead wife for forcing him on her deathbed into the job that forced him to be a wimpy marionette on a stage. He felt himself a lifeless puppet in a grand performance, while the puppet master, the evil and ambitious Jesuit order, guided all his strings. It seemed the higher up he got in politics, the more strings the Jesuits put onto his marionette. When he tried to escape, to stop being a marionette, the Jesuits began to cut off the strings, leaving him dangling and suffering, like the Kursk disaster or the bombings in Chechnya, or jets crashing to intimidate him. Larissa only had idealism about him as the greatest president. She had no idea how much fantasy and lies controlled a president's day-to-day actions. If only she knew that no one could attain a high position like Russian president unless they let the Jesuits control the strings. Now the wife who could sustain him as a leader, to encourage him to break off the strings and perform on his own stage, had died. He faced the wolves and spiders, the puppet masters, alone and very lonely. While the world cheered him on as the great Russian president, the victory seemed hollow to him, because to be a puppet on the Jesuit strings, a cowardly puppet who couldn't break these strings that strangled all that was honor, manliness, courage, and decency. As he sat in his limousine headed towards the Kremlin, he stared out the car's windows and only saw drabness, dreariness, depression, death, in the sticks of trees and landscape of Moscow nearing the dead of winter, cold, barren, like his heart, like the Kursk sailors who died needlessly to preserve the powerful puppet master, the Jesuit order. This monster, this puppet master, this puppeteer planned more treacheries in the future, and he knew that as the Russian president, the spider would weave him more and more into her web. And how would he meet the challenge? Like he did the Kursk. He paled at the thought. To do this again made him want to throw himself before a Bengal tiger, let the tiger maul his neck, grasp his jugular vein, and throw him to the woods, because that is where his heart was. If he couldn't be a man, a real man, he didn't want to live. If he could only be a coward, a wimp, when he viewed himself in the mirror, it didn't matter what the world thought of him. If he failed as a man and became a shell, a limp puppet on a stage, playing a grand performance as some almighty leader, but was just a limp puppet on a stage, a sham, a worm, let him die. Vladimir hated the charades and performances, which the American president seemed to love. Perhaps if he had less male blood in his veins, he wouldn't mind the charade. But Vladimir Putin had real manliness, real honor, and each time he betrayed that manliness, he longed for the manliness and heroism that stirred deep within him, to rise up and triumph, to shove the spider, the puppet master, to the wall, smashing him until his guts spilled out. Yes, that's what a real man would do. But every time he tried to rise up, the puppet master grabbed the strings harder, wrapping them around him, round and round, like a spider preparing her meal, twirling him round and round in the deadly webs to the death of all that was honor, manliness, and truth. Yes, that was what a president was, a puppet controlled by a spider in its web. There was no glory to this job. Yet if he quit, he could see that another person in this job would bring Russia totally under the control of the Jesuit spider. He didn't know how, but he had to find a way to break these strings. Too much of a man to quit, but too much of a man to want to live as a shell of a man. His sweet wife Larissa, the role model of submission and poise, lacked the steel he needed as a president's wife. He loved her deeply. But whenever he needed steel, she seemed vacant away. She had died on him. Oh, it was his fault, because the Jesuit doctors fooled him, thought she had breast cancer, so the chemotherapy he used to cure her breast cancer fed her systemic yeast infection, and she died. He felt himself no match to these brilliant and daring Jesuits, these brilliant puppet masters, who moved each world leader with precision on the Jesuit stage. The puppet master wrapped him tighter and tighter in their web, controlling his doctors, his alliances, the rebels within his own government, his wife. They killed his heart when they killed his wife. The former Soviet Union must not regain her world power status with a president like Vladimir Putin. If he could not be controlled, he must be destroyed. He thought he could forge on with her memories alone to sustain him. But after the Kursk, he began to realize he needed real flesh and blood beside him to sustain him. There was no one he could turn to who could understand the complexities of his job and could counsel him over how to remain a man and a president at the same time. No easy feat when a master puppeteer determined to eradicate manliness from the earth, to replace it with absolute submission to the puppet master, especially in any man of importance and influence. Larissa, sweet Larissa, what more could he want in a wife? But he needed steel in a wife, because only steel could break the puppet's strings. Larissa lacked the wisdom and courage to make him that president of steel, to run his own stage, to break free from the powerful spider. This spider had reigned since the days of Ignatius of Loyola from 1491 to 1566 56 is when Loyola lived, the founder of the Jesuit order, and had only increased in power and wealth, rewritten history to make those sympathetic to Jesuit goals the victors and heroes, and those who opposed Jesuit goals traitors and villains. To break free from this spider who reigned for centuries with all world leaders inside her web would require a miracle from God. And this is from The Forbidden Abyss, Part 1. Which you can get at Amazon.com. This is a reading, and this is from the chapter entitled Vladimir's Wife Who Never Died, 2001 to 2002.